The Earl of Strathwick did not raise his voice. Aveline Pembridge had been in the house 3 weeks before she understood that this was the most dangerous thing about him. He stood in the entrance hall of what had been, until 18 months ago, her father's house, the same flagstone floor her mother had paced during thunderstorms, the same oak paneling her father had refused to sell even in the lean years. And he looked at her the way a man looks at something he has not noticed before and does not particularly want to notice now. "You were engaged as a maid-of-all-work," he said, "not as an archivist." Aveline kept her hands still at her sides. She had been found in the estate office, going through the household ledgers. She had a reason ready. She had spent the better part of 2 days preparing one. But the Earl had not asked for a reason. He had simply looked. "Your Grace," she said, "I was looking for the household inventory so I could plan the linen washing for the week. The inventory is not in the estate office." "I didn't know that." "You do now." He reached into his waistcoat pocket, withdrew a small coin, a shilling, worn at the edges, and set it on the hall table between them. "For your trouble," he said, "and for the afternoon you've wasted. Take it and get back to your work." He walked away, not in anger, not with any particular feeling at all. Aveline picked up the coin. She carried it to the back staircase, the narrow one that servants used, the one she had run up and down as a child so many times she could do it in the dark. She sat on the 3rd step and looked at the coin in the light from the small high window. It was not a standard shilling. She knew that at once because the rim was wrong, too thick, too deliberate. It was a trade token, the kind private companies issued in years when currency ran short. She had seen them before. Her father had kept a tin of them in his study desk. Her father's study desk, in this house, which now belonged to the Earl of Strathwick. She turned the token over. On one face, a shipping knot. On the other, in small careful letters around the edge, Pembridge Maritime Trading, Halifax, 1 shilling, payable on demand. And in the center, the house device her father had used on every document, every letter, every contract she had ever seen him sign, a compass rose with 8 points, the north arm longer than the rest. Aveline stopped breathing. She pressed the token flat into her palm. The compass points dug into her skin, and she let them. Her father had built the company before he was a lord. He had kept it going alongside the estate because he had said many times that a title was only as good as the work behind it. He had issued these tokens to his crews in lean seasons, small silver promises, payable on demand. Her father had been dead for 2 years. His company had been dissolved 8 months after that, so she had been told by her Uncle Fenton, who had managed the estate when everything fell apart. The debts, Fenton had explained, with a great deal of patience and a great deal of paper, had been considerable. The estate had been sold to cover them. There had been nothing left. She had been 23 years old and alone, and had believed the man her father had trusted. If the company had been dissolved, its tokens should not still be in circulation. A dissolved company's scrip was worthless unless someone somewhere was still honoring it, or unless someone was using it who did not know, or did not care, what it meant. She put the token in the toe of her left boot and went back to work. She had come to Strathwick Hall 6 weeks after her father's solicitor had informed her, with professional sympathy, that there was no money. Her uncle had been efficient about it. The estate had gone to a buyer her uncle had found himself. The Earl of Strathwick, a man she had never heard of, newly returned from business abroad and looking for a property in the province. Aveline had taken a room in Halifax with what she had left and spent 3 weeks trying to understand how her father's estate, an estate he had spent 30 years building back from his own father's mismanagement, could be gone in 8 months. She had asked for the documents. Her uncle had provided copies. The copies had been thorough and correct, and told her nothing she could use. She had come to the estate as a maid-of-all-work under the name Miss Cole, her mother's maiden name, a thing she had been within her rights to use, because she needed to see the original ledgers, the ones her uncle had handled, the ones that showed, in the actual ink of the actual entries, where the money had gone. She had not planned beyond that. It was not clever. It was what you did when you were 24 years old and had nothing left, and the one person who might have helped you was 2 years in the ground. The household at Strathwick Hall ran lean. The Earl kept 12 staff where her father's time had required 20, and they were careful around her. Not unkind. Careful. The housekeeper, Mrs. Norbury, was a broad, direct woman of 55 who had come with the property and who ran the house with the quiet authority of someone who had survived several owners and intended to survive several more. She had found Aveline on the second morning, struggling to light the range, had taken the flints away without comment, lit it herself in under a minute, and said, "What did you do before this?" "I kept house," said Aveline, which was true. "For whom?" "My mother," also true. Mrs. Norbury had looked at her for a long moment. Then she had handed back the flints. "The range wants to be coaxed," she said. "Not forced." That was all. But after that, the housekeeper watched her. Not with suspicion, exactly. With the careful attention of a woman who had learned to notice things. The estate office was locked on Wednesdays when Morley, the estate manager, rode out to the tenant farms. Aveline had learned this in her first week. She had also learned that Mrs. Norbury kept a spare key on a hook inside the linen press for emergencies. On the Wednesday of her third week, she had tried. She had found the ledgers on the shelf in order, labeled by year. She had found the year of her father's death and the year after, and she had been comparing entries when the Earl had appeared in the doorway. He had given her a coin and told her to go back to work. She had gone back to work. She had also, that evening, written down everything she had seen in the 20 minutes she'd had with the ledgers, in the smallest hand she could manage, on the inside back cover of her prayer book. The numbers did not match. That was the simple fact of it. The figures her uncle had given her, in his careful explanatory documents, were not the same as the figures in the estate office. The difference was not small. The village of Strathwick Cross was 4 miles from the hall. Aveline walked it on her free half-day in a pair of boots not quite right for the road. By the time she reached the main street, her feet hurt, and she did not care. She went into the chandler's shop and asked the woman behind the counter. A solid, ginger-haired person of about 40, Kit Sallow, according to the sign above the door. Whether there was any work to be had for a woman who could keep accounts and write a clear hand. Kit Sallow looked her over the way a person looks over a horse they are not sure is worth the asking price. "Can you actually keep accounts?" she said. "Or are you telling me you can and hoping the question doesn't come up?" Aveline pulled out her prayer book, opened it to the back cover, and set it on the counter. Kit looked at the columns of figures for a while. "Those aren't yours," she said finally. "No." "But you read them." "I did." Kit picked up the book, turned it towards the window light, and studied it without saying anything. "I've got 3 years of receipts," she said at last, "that I've been meaning to sort since my husband died. 2 shillings a week, Friday afternoons, and if you tell anyone I needed help with my own receipts, I'll deny it." "Miss Cole," said Aveline. Kit Sallow's mouth twitched slightly, the way it does when someone knows an answer is half an answer. "Right," she said. She was happier than she had been in a year and a half. This kept surprising her on the walk back up the hill in the evenings. She had a task that used her mind. She had Kit Sallow, who talked to her without managing her. She had 4 shillings in a tin, under her floorboard, and she had earned every penny of it. She kept the Pembridge token in the toe of her left boot. She took it out every evening and looked at it. Payable on demand. She was not ready to demand anything yet. She learned things in the village the way you learn things in a place with one street. Slowly, sideways, and completely. She learned that the Strathwick estate had changed hands twice in 5 years before the Earl bought it. She learned that Morley had been in place through all 3 owners, hired originally by whoever had sold the property to her father's creditors, and that the tenants paid him and rarely saw anyone else. She learned from Kit Sallow's receipts that Morley collected rent in coin and recorded it in the ledgers as 10% less than he collected. She was very still for a long moment when she understood that. Then she closed the receipts and asked Kit, carefully, whether she had ever had occasion to complain to anyone about the rent figures. "Who would I complain to?" said Kit Sallow. "The man at the hall doesn't read the books. Morley knows he doesn't read the books. That's the whole arrangement, isn't it?" Aveline put the token on the table between them. Kit picked it up. She turned it over. She looked at the compass rose. Something moved across her face. "Pembridge," she said. "My father shipped cargo on a Pembridge vessel," Kit said quietly, "out of Halifax, the season before Lord Pembridge died." She set the token down. She looked at Aveline. "Miss Cole, you might want to be careful." "I am being careful." "More careful than you've been," said Kit. "Morley has been asking about you in the village, about where you came from, about why a woman with your kind of handwriting is working as a maid-of-all-work at the hall." Aveline walked back to the estate that evening and understood, for the first time, that she had very little time. She went to Mrs. Norbury. She did not tell her everything. She told her she had reason to believe Morley had been recording inaccurate figures in the rent ledgers, and that she had documentation to support it. She put Kit Sallow's receipts, borrowed with Kit's permission, on the kitchen table. Mrs. Norbury looked at them for a long time without speaking. The kitchen ticked around them. A pot simmered on the range. "I have suspected this for 4 years," Mrs. Norbury said at last. "Why didn't you say anything?" "To whom?" The housekeeper's voice was flat, not angry, just flat. "His lordship does not read the accounts. He has a manager precisely so that he does not have to. I am the housekeeper. I keep the house. I do not keep the books." She looked up. "He will say the same thing to me that he said to you. Take it and go back to your work." "Then we go around him," said Aveline. Mrs. Norbury looked at her for a long time. "Who are you?" she said, not as an accusation, as a genuine question. "Someone with a great deal at stake in whether the Strathwick ledgers are accurate," said Aveline. "That is all I can tell you right now." Mrs. Norbury was quiet. Then, "Morley keeps his personal records in a black tin in the estate office. I have seen him go to it. I do not have a key." She stood up and began clearing the table. "Good night, Miss Cole." She went for the tin on a Friday morning when Morley was at the South Farms. She did not have a key. She had, from her father's house in Halifax, a set of small tools she had not entirely explained to herself why she'd brought. The tin took 11 minutes and left marks she did not entirely manage to hide. Inside were 3 things: a second ledger, in Morley's hand, with the real figures; a set of correspondence with her Uncle Fenton's office in Halifax, going back 4 years, and a folded document that took her a moment to understand, and then took her breath away entirely. It was a deed of assignment, dated 6 weeks before her father died. Her father's signature at the bottom, she knew it as well as she knew her own, and beside it, a notary stamp from an office in Halifax she had never heard of. It assigned the Pembridge Maritime Trading Company in its entirety, including all outstanding debts owed to the company, to her Uncle Fenton. Her father had not signed this document. The signature was close. It was very close. but the pressure was wrong on the downstroke of the P, and her father had always, without fail, dotted the I in his middle name with a small open circle. On this document, the dot was round and filled. She was still holding the deed when the door opened. It was the Earl. He looked at the open tin. He looked at the marks on the lock. He looked at the documents in her hands. He did not speak. "Your Grace," she said, "I would ask you not to call for anyone else yet. I have something I need to show you and something I need to tell you, and I would rather not say it in front of an audience." He looked at her for a long time. "You are not a maid-of-all-work," he said. "No." "Are you in any danger of being one in the near future?" It was not quite a joke. She did not quite smile. "My name is Aveline Pembridge," she said. "My father was Lord Pembridge. You bought this estate from my Uncle Fenton 8 months after my father died. I came here because I believed my uncle had falsified the debt documents to force the sale. I now believe he also forged my father's signature on this deed to take the company separately." She held it out. "I recognize my father's handwriting. This is not it." The Earl took the document. He looked at it for a long time. "Sit down," he said. She had expected many things. She had not expected him to sit across from her and read every document in the tin, methodically, without speaking, for the better part of an hour. When he finished, he set the papers in a stack. "Morley has been filing altered accounts for at least 3 years," he said. "Before I bought the property, before the previous owner as well, likely. He was quiet. I paid what I was told the estate was worth, based on accounts I did not audit myself. Because I bought in a hurry and trusted a solicitor my agent engaged, who was," he stopped, "who was very likely in contact with your uncle's office." Aveline said nothing. "You have been in my house for 6 weeks under a false name," he said. "Yes. And you have found evidence of fraud against your father's estate, which means he worked it out. She watched him work it out, which means the sale of this property may not be legally valid. I don't know that yet. I would need a solicitor who isn't connected to my uncle to review the documents." He was quiet for a moment. "I gave you a shilling," he said. "You did. To send you away." "I know." He looked at the Pembridge token, which she had set on the desk between them when she sat down. The compass rose, caught the light. "I am not your enemy," he said. "I didn't think you were," said Aveline. "I didn't know what you were. I needed to find out. By working in my kitchens. I didn't have another way in." He set the token down. He stood. "I am going to send for my solicitor, my own man, not the one who handled the purchase. You will tell him everything you've told me." A pause. "In the meantime, you will stop being Miss Cole and start being Miss Pembridge, and I will tell Mrs. Norbury that you are to have your father's old rooms." He looked at the window for a moment. "They have not been changed. I did not see the point in changing them." Aveline had to put her hand on the desk, just briefly, before she stood. Her Uncle Fenton was arrested in Halifax on the 14th of November. The deed of assignment was ruled fraudulent by the Court of Chancery 6 weeks later, after a Halifax notary testified that the stamp used in the document had belonged to an office that had closed 8 months before the date on the deed. The company was dissolved, genuinely, this time, but its outstanding receivables were returned to the estate. It was not a fortune. It was enough. Morley was tried in January on 7 counts and transported for 10 years. The second ledger had been sufficient on its own. Kit Sallow had offered to testify and had said, when Aveline told her it was probably not necessary, that she was going to testify anyway on principle. The estate returned to Aveline Pembridge in March. She sat with Mr. Abney, recommended by Kit Sallow, who turned out to know exactly what a solicitor should be. For every meeting, The Earl made no attempt to minimize her presence at these discussions, though he could have. What she had not planned for was this: he had bought the property in good faith and had put real money into it. The south tenant cottage roofs, the drainage on the east fields, the bridge on the mill road that the village had been asking about for 4 years. She walked the estate in February with Mrs. Norbury, room by room, and saw what he had done in the 8 months before she arrived. He had made it better, quietly, without announcement. She put this to him in the library, standing, because she had learned these things were better said standing. "I am not going to pretend this is simple," she said. "You are owed for your improvements. I am prepared to structure a mortgage, a real one, with terms I can actually meet, rather than a clean return, which wouldn't be fair to what you put in. You don't owe me for the roof repairs," he said. "Owners maintain their property. You owned it. You may not have technically since March. The retroactive legality of property maintenance is a question I am prepared to leave to the solicitors." "I am the solicitor's client," she said. "I would like to have an opinion." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. "Then have one," he said. "What do you want, Miss Pembridge? Not what is fair. What do you want?" Aveline had not been asked this question in 2 years. She had to think about it. "I want the estate back," she said. "I want the tenant leases written properly, with terms, and reviewed by someone who isn't Morley. I want the accounts open, quarterly, to me and to Mr. Abney, and I want to understand them myself rather than trusting someone else to understand them for me." She paused. "And you improve this property genuinely. That is worth something. I would rather structure something fair than have a clean break that leaves you cheated. You were deceived as much as I was." He was quiet for a moment. "And for you personally," she said. "Not the property, for you. I would like to know what the estate looked like when your father ran it," he said. "I've been here 8 months. I have no context for what's possible here." It was not what she had expected. "I can tell you that," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." She moved back into the hall in April. Her father's old rooms, as he had said, had not been changed. She sat in the window seat the first evening and looked at the harbor in the distance, and understood that she had come back to a place that was the same and entirely different, and that she would have to learn it over again. Mrs. Norbury brought tea and did not say anything for a while. "He kept the rooms," Aveline said. "He kept everything the way he found it," said Mrs. Norbury. "He said he hadn't earned the right to change it yet." She set the tray down. "He's an odd man. I've had worse." The accounts were opened on the first Monday of every month. Aveline sat with Mr. Abney, and then as the months went on without him. She and the Earl went through the figures together and argued, regularly, about priorities. She thought the South Orchard needed investment before the stable expansion. He thought the reverse. She turned out to be right about the orchard. He told her so, directly, which she had not expected from a man like him. She filed that away and thought about it a great deal on the walk down to Kit Sallow's on Thursdays. There was a moment, some months into this arrangement, when she found him in her father's study standing at the window, with her father's old tin of trade tokens in his hand. He had not heard her come in. He had the tin open, and he was looking at the tokens inside, all of them, everyone, with the compass rose. And he was very still. She said quietly, from the doorway, "He started the company with nothing. A borrowed dock and a lease on one vessel. He used to say the only honest measure of a man was what he built that didn't already exist." The Earl closed the tin. He turned around. "I'm sorry, I was not." "No," she said. "You're welcome to look." The pause that followed was different from the other pauses between them. It was the kind of pause that means something has shifted, and both people in the room know it, and neither has yet said so aloud. She said, You have been in this house for nearly 2 years now. You are not going anywhere." "No." "And I am not going anywhere." "No." She walked to the desk and opened the accounts ledger and said, without looking up, "The South Orchard was not intuition. I studied the drainage reports for a week before I brought it to you." "I know," he said. "I know you did." She looked up. He was still standing by the window. He looked like a man who has worked out what he wants to say and is deciding whether this is the right moment for it. She decided for him. "Sit down," she said. "The February accounts are better than I expected, and I want to show you the figures before I explain why. Otherwise you'll assume it was luck." He sat. He was almost smiling. It was a good almost smile, the kind that takes some time to earn. She set her father's token on the desk between them, payable on demand, same as always, and began to explain the February figures. And outside the window the harbor caught the late light, and the hall was warm, and the South Orchard had been properly drained. And there were people on this land with leases now, real ones, with their names written in plain language, and the accounts, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, were honest and fully her own to read.